Support for Central Florida Public Media comes from JustCallMo.com and attorney Mo DeWitt, proud presenter of WMFE's Engage program. Mo DeWitt is committed to offering legal guidance in personal injury cases, such as car accidents and slip and falls. Offices in Orlando. More at JustCallMo.com. Welcome to Engage, leading conversations that matter. Engage is made possible with support from inaugural sponsor JustCallMo.com and the support of listeners like you.
You are listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Coming up, we'll look at an effort by a Florida-based mining firm to use radioactive material in the state's road surfaces. And we'll talk about providing much-needed parenting resources to young fathers here. First, though, parents are suing the state over the law that makes it easier to ban books in Florida. They filed this suit last Thursday, claiming their First Amendment rights are violated by the law that requires each school board in Florida to have a formal policy in place for challenging books. Plaintiffs argue the law favors parents who want books banned from public schools and doesn't give the same rights to those opposed to removing the books. Stefana Farrell is one of the three parents suing the State Board of Education. The Orange County mother of two is also director of the Florida Freedom to Read project. She joined Engage to talk about the lawsuit filed in the U.S. District Court of Northern Florida. We started the conversation by asking her why now is the right time to file suit.
For a number of years, since pretty much the legislation went into, the 2022 legislation went into effect. And then with the 2023 legislation offering this additional state review procedure, I, as a parent, have noticed an uptick in a lack of resources or the removal of resources from my own children. So during the 23-24 school year, neither one of my children had access to a classroom library. It wasn't necessarily because my district didn't try to get books approved for the classroom. They did. They spent lots and lots of money and overtime trying to get media specialists to approve books. But there's this fear around the legislation, and there's a lot of fear-based decision-making happening, not just in the classroom, but school and district level, being in fear of being found out of compliance with really broad laws and vague laws. And so I saw books getting removed, and I tried to appeal to my board. And, my school district said that process doesn't exist for you as a parent. And so finding myself frustrated and knowing that there were other parents out there frustrated as well, that books were getting removed, that even our governor and our commissioner have said, you know what? You shouldn't have removed Roberto Clemente in Duval County. We shouldn't be removing classics to comply with these laws. The laws don't do that. And so, we knew enough to know that there are wrong decisions being made at the district level, thinking that they have to do these things to comply with the law. But parents should have the opportunity to question that and to ask for a review. And that process doesn't exist in the law for us.
So you're finding that within the school district, they don't necessarily want to ban these books or take these actions, but they just feel kind of scared to do so.
So there's been misleading guidance. At one point in time, there was a memo that was released by the state that said any depiction or description of sexual conduct had to be removed. And that caused my district here in Orange County to make some decisions to withhold access to classroom books and the media center, thinking we'll have to go through another review process and see if these books still comply with the law. And so there's the objection process that in some districts has been overrun with one parent filing hundreds of challenges. And then there's the situation like Orange County where there's an internal review to ensure that there's compliance in addition to the objections that have withheld a lot of materials.
Are you getting any kind of pushback from other parents who maybe support the removal of books? What does that process look like for you?
Well, I tend to be a little bit more outspoken than the average person on this issue. So I show up to school board meetings where I've had a school board member not intentionally address me purposely, but look at me while she was making her comments in support of removal. I've had, when I spoke out at the State Board of Education meetings that happen to be in Orlando. I'll run into situations where I find myself talking to somebody that I happen to disagree with. And then there's been the social media interactions that are not pleasant. I've been called names. I've had my personal moral compass being called into question. People that don't know me saying that I support pornographic materials in our schools. I absolutely do not. I just object to broadly labeling anything pornography simply because it addresses something like sexual assault or a coming of age story that's meant and written to help teenagers feel connected and not feel alone in what they're experiencing and feeling. So it's hard having the character attacks. It really is. Parents are supposed to have equal rights in this state to uphold and ensure and direct the education and upbringing of their children. And, some parents have more of a say than others, and it unfortunately tilts the scales in favor of censorship.
Given the attacks, the personal attacks that you're going through, I'm just curious, what keeps you motivated to do this?
When it comes to public education and my choice in education for my kids, it is public schools. My husband and I, we were public school kids. And although some people might make the choice to go to a particular religious school or to homeschool, we truly appreciated a diverse and productive, challenging environment that our public schools bring, where our kids will have their perspectives challenged, where they will have their beliefs challenged and had the opportunity to discuss them in an open classroom, to debate important topics, and to really model the world that they're going to be in as adults and prepare for it. So that's what keeps me going. It's the fact that there is no other choice for my kids. It's public schools, and I need to make sure that they have access to a robust collection of materials that will challenge them to see beyond the perspective that they have.
So you filed this lawsuit. Can we talk a little bit just about the legal part of it? What legally in this do you think the state is violating? What ways do you see the state is in violation of the law legally?
So we should have equal access to a process. And the law right now favors a particular viewpoint, because right now, the only viewpoint that is allowed this state review process is a viewpoint that objects to the use of a material. I don't object to the use of a material, and I don't have a way to, go to the state and say, hey, I think my district may have removed this book in error. I don't believe it rises to the level of being inappropriate for a particular audience. And I deserve to have the same access to this review that parents that object to the use of. And so there's a viewpoint discrimination there in the law. And that's one of the main reasons why we're fighting this.
And what resolution would you like to see with the suit?
Well, ideally, it's a fair process, right? And I happen to believe that our districts should have the ability to make these decisions and do so through a process that is public. It's a committee review, the community coming together, and we decide what's right for our community and for each school, honestly, because one school community can differ so much from another. So in an ideal situation, we go back to what we had 2-3 years ago, where there was a local process in place. People can still object if they feel that they need to, but it's not a politicized objection where we're quickly and quietly forcing the removal of, in some cases, hundreds of books. It's a process. It brings the community together, allows for open discussion and debate. And then we really rely on professionals to make the decisions when it comes to curation and move away from these permanent bans on materials that broadly label books with little information about whether or not the books are actually appropriate or inappropriate for all students.
And would you help me understand the timeline now that you've filed the suit? What's next? How long does this process take?
So that's not something that I can answer. I've never personally sued the state before, so I don't know. We have been dealing with this particular law for more, an entire school year has gone by. There's been a lot of confusion within our different districts. So hopefully it'll be quick. Hopefully we can get some resolve, because right now what we're seeing with this unfairly weighted process, we're seeing districts decide, hey, you know what? Keeping that controversial book on the shelves, it's actually more of a risk to us financially, and it's going to cost us time and resources to keep that book on the shelf. Let's just remove it now, and then we don't have to worry about it down the road. We don't have to worry about that really expensive state review process that the district has to pay for regardless of the outcome. And so as long as that process continues to be in place and only available to certain parents, we're going to continue to see districts err on the side of caution and err on the side of censorship.
Stefana, you're a mom, you're a parent. What kind of conversations do you have with your kids about this lawsuit?
So my kids, they're younger, they're in elementary and early middle school. And so it's an age appropriate discussion about what's been happening. And here in our district, they haven't seen too many books, individual titles that they know and love get affected. But in other districts, there have been books like the Dogman series or Unicorns Are the Worst, books that they have read and enjoyed that have either been covered up or removed from shelves entirely. And then, of course, like I said, they had the impact of not having classroom libraries last year. And so we've talked a lot about how laws, and vague laws in particular, can impact people and how they might decide to act in response. And so they understand that this is important, that we stand up for this, that when you believe in something and you believe that you're making and fighting for something that's right, that you use your voice and the position that you have to advocate not only on behalf of yourself, but on the behalf of your friends and neighbors too.
That was Orange County mother Stefana Farrell. She is a founder of the Florida Freedom to Read Project and one of the plaintiffs suing the state over the book bans. We're joined now in studio by Central Florida Public Media education reporter Danielle Pryor. And you've covered it when the lawsuit was filed last week, and You've been covering the book bans for years now. Have you heard anything from the DeSantis administration, including the State Board of Education, about the lawsuit?
Yeah, so last week we reached out to the DeSantis administration, and Julia Friedland, who's one of his spokespeople, emailed me back a very brief statement, which I've seen in most other people's reporting, and it says, quote, "There are no banned books in Florida. However, sexually explicit material and instruction are not suitable for classrooms." So it was a very interesting statement to receive after the lawsuit, but really kind of in step with what I've heard from the DeSantis administration since about February. I went to a press conference with him. I think it was the day after Valentine's Day, and the whole conference was about how the book ban is a hoax created by the media. And that was, of course, the conference where he had suggested that the legislature limit book challenges, however. So this is pretty par for the course right now.
Can you talk to me more about how the book ban has changed since the law was originally passed and signed by the governor in 2023?
So just as a review, HB 1069 is the law that went into effect in 2023, of course, requiring every school board to have a form and a policy in place for challenging a book. And then this February, we saw the governor change his tune and suggest that the legislature limit book challenges, because we saw in places like Escambia County, there being thousands of books challenged and taken off the shelves. So now we have this new law, HB 1285, that takes effect July 1st, and that'll limit book challenges for folks who don't have a child in a school district to one a month. So, for example, I don't have any children. If I want to challenge a book in Orange County, that is now limited for me. However, parents can still challenge as many books as they'd like, and there's no penalty for making a lot of challenges. At first, there might have been some sort of fine, and there is no fine in place. So we'll have to see how effective this is starting in just a few weeks.
So in your reporting, you found that the administration is saying books aren't banned.
Right.
So even though they're saying no books are banned,
Yes.
PEN America, which is a nonprofit that defends writers, protects free creative expression in literature, they have a rather different perspective on what is happening in Florida schools.
Yeah, so they say Florida still leads the country in book bans. In 2024, we have over 3,135 book bans in 11 school districts. Most of those are in Escambia County, where about a third of the books that I just talked about, or the book bans we just talked about, are in that county. And so what we're kind of watching now is to see where this lawsuit goes, as well as 2 other federal lawsuits that are happening in Escambia County over books that have been pulled and challenged. So book bans definitely aren't going anywhere as of yet in Florida. Again, we'll have to wait to see if HB 1285 and those limits to challenges has the effect, the desired effect, I think, that the DeSantis administration wants to see come July.
Central Florida Public Media education reporter Danielle Pryor, thank you for that context and your insight.
Thank you.
Ahead on Engage, we will look at an effort to incorporate radioactive materials into road surfaces in the state. And later, we'll explore a program to educate and support young parents in Central Florida. Just a reminder, we want to hear from you. Let us know what you'd like to hear more about, or maybe what you're glad you heard. Send us an email to engage@cfpublic.org. This is Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Ahead on this program, Haki Nkrumah is on a mission to help educate and support the region's young parents.
We have a program called Gents to Gentlemen, which is for 10 to 13-year-old boys. So we try to get them before they even start having sex because, we know that they started having sex now, 10 years old, because we have fathers 12 years old, 13, 14.
Nkrumah joins us to talk about the programs helping young parents. First, though, October of 2020, the Environmental Protection Agency approved the use of a little-known industrial waste product in the construction of government roadway projects. Less than a year later, the EPA withdrew that approval due to a lack of evidence, citing the safety of waste product, primarily because it was radioactive. A Tampa-based fertilizer company has the approval of the state of Florida to test the same radioactive material called phosphogypsum, with the hope of using it to build road surfaces in the state. Critics are concerned the state's wet weather could cause contaminated runoff to pollute water tables and agricultural spaces. Max Chesnes is an environment and climate reporter with the Tampa Bay Times. He used the Freedom of Information Act to obtain an impact report reviewing the science on the safety of using phosphogypsum in road development. He joined Engage to parse out his findings. He began our conversation by explaining exactly what this radioactive byproduct is and where it comes from.
Phosphogypsum is created during the process of mining phosphate rock to create fertilizer, and it's essentially a solid waste byproduct that's left behind when phosphate rock is processed in acid. And according to the EPA, which is the federal environmental regulatory agency that oversees phosphogypsum, it contains radium, which decays to form a radon gas. And both radium and radon are radioactive, but they occur naturally in our environment. So the EPA a long time ago was worried about long-term emissions of radon leaking out and potentially affecting humans. And so what they did was they created regulations around phosphogypsum. So if you've ever driven through Central Florida and you've seen these large landfill-looking stacks that are full of phosphogypsum, that's the product of the Clean Air Act. That's the federal government saying, we don't want people to be exposed to this material in high concentrations over long periods of time. And so you see these large mountain-looking structures all over Central Florida.
Given that, why is it being considered then as a roadway ingredient?
It's a good question. I think, if you ask Mosaic that question, their answer has always been that they want to catch up with other countries around the world that are using phosphogypsum because of their nations have less regulatory structures around the material. If you talk to critics, though, many people that are worried about Mosaic's plan to test this material in roadbeds will say that there's just not enough data to prove that this is a healthy material that won't leach into our groundwater over time. In June of last year, Governor DeSantis approved a measure that would allow the Florida Department of Transportation to study phosphogypsum in roadways. That measure was signed into law last June. And throughout my reporting of that particular measure, I discovered that Mosaic not only lobbied for this particular bill, but they also hosted and paid nearly $25,000 for one of the bill's sponsors, a Plant City Republican named Lawrence McClure, to have a fundraiser on one of Mosaic's former mining sites that became a Gulf getaway in the Hardee and Polk County border. So Mosaic has a lot of influence in the state of Florida. They are regular donors to the Florida political class. And if you're watching TV, you might even see their logo on the ice at Tampa Bay Lightning games. Their influence is all over the state of Florida.
So is Mosaic making an argument that there are benefits of using phosphogypsum in roads?
Yeah, that is their argument, that by taking this material out of gyp stacks, we're eliminating the problem that has been created by storing this waste material. Now, I'm sure a lot of people in Florida and the Tampa Bay and even Orlando area are familiar with the Piney Point wastewater disaster that happened in 2021. That was the product of a non-Mosaic gyp stack that had issues, and it resulted in millions of gallons of processed water leaking into Tampa Bay. So Mosaic cites environmental concerns with gyp stacks when they talk about using phosphogypsum in a beneficial way. They also believe that the science shows that this material does not have health risks that might over time increase somebody's cancer risk. They are of the steadfast belief that this is a beneficial material that can be taken from their facilities and then used to place them into roadways. And so critics of that proposal will say that this is just another way of Mosaic taking a waste product and trying to sell it to make more money. And I've brought that question to the company several times in the past, and they're pretty adamant when they, in their response, and they say this is not a money-making venture, that this is something that is purely beneficial to reuse the product.
And in your reporting, Max, you spoke with a professor of civil and environmental engineering who articulated some of the perceived risks of using it in roads. Can you talk about what he said?
Yeah, I went to Dr. Jianming Shi. He's the head of environmental engineering at Washington State University, and I wanted to use him because he is a third-party engineer who really has no stake in any of the research over here on the east coast of Florida. And I submitted to him the state's report that outlined some of the current science around phosphogypsum, and he had a couple of key takeaways, namely that the benefit of using phosphogypsum would be to reduce traditional road building materials like cement and lime from being used and preventing that material from building up in landfills. But he did note that there are several risks to using phosphogypsum in Florida roadways. One is that the science just doesn't really exist on what this material might act like if it's exposed to long periods of moisture. Gypsum interacts pretty easily with moisture, and it's just not clear whether or not this would run off into our soil or our groundwater over time. And obviously, Florida is a very rainy place, and we get a lot of rain every single year. And so what that looks like if we're using a road material that might not be potentially healthy in high exposures, there's a lot of scientific questions that still remain about phosphogypsum. He also noted that in this larger review created by the state, that there really isn't any focus on the potential ecological, environmental, or human health impacts. It mainly studies the suitability of this material. In other words, what would it look like in a roadway? Could cars drive over it while it maintains its integrity? More of the engineering structural side of things and less of the ecological environmental impacts. And a lot of the critics that are worried about this proposal point to that lack of data and say, well, we just don't really know what this will do to a human if we're driving on it or if a construction worker is building with it every single day. The data just doesn't exist. And so that's the main argument against these proposals that we see today.
The report, was it publicly available or did you have to FOIA it?
Great question. Yeah. So I knew that the deadline, given the Florida law said that the Florida Department of Transportation had until April of 2024 to produce a suitability review. And essentially what that was a collection of all of the existing studies of phosphogypsum and what that looks like potentially in the future if we were to use them in roads. Now that report, according to Florida law, was set to be created and produced by April. So I had it in my calendar to double check with the state agency by the end of April. That's what I did. I followed up with them and said, hey, Florida law says this report is now due. Can I have a copy of it? Well, the spokesperson for the agency responded back and said, this will be a report you have to do a formal records request through. So I adhered to that process. And then within about a week or so, I got my hands on the report itself. Now, I don't know the reasoning for why I had to go that avenue. That's a question for the state government and general access questions on how to receive these public records. But they did make me file a formal records request to receive this report.
We're talking with Max Chesnes. He is the climate and environment reporter for the Tampa Bay Times. Given the studies that are happening and that the data doesn't exist, where and when, what's the soonest this could pass testing and actually be used in roads?
Yeah, that's a great question. And really all of this hinges on federal approval. So the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has the final say in whether or not Mosaic will be allowed to take their phosphogypsum from their property and test it in a roadway. And the story that I wrote last week really explained the process that the EPA plans to, by the end of this year, of this calendar year, have a decision on whether or not they will allow Mosaic to do that. Now, that decision will come with a public comment period. Either way, if they approve or disapprove Mosaic's request, the public will be able to weigh in on why they think that was either a good idea or a bad idea. But timeline-wise, this is a very slow-moving regulatory process. So even if the EPA were to decide to allow Mosaic to begin a test of this nature, it could still be months, even years, before the actual applications were to hit Florida roadways. A lot of testing and study would have to go into something of this magnitude. And frankly, the EPA has the main regulation over this material. I mean, it's never been approved really, in recent years at least, to take phosphogypsum out of a gyp stack and put it into roads. And Mosaic's plan specifically, they want to use up to 1,200 tons of phosphogypsum from their stack at a facility in Polk County at their New Wales facility. So they would basically get workers to remove the material, blend it into different road components, and then test its durability over a period of time. That's the ultimate proposal that is awaiting EPA approval, and that will likely come by the end of this year.
Anything else in your reporting and your investigation that really stood out to you that we should know about?
Yeah, it's just that Mosaic is it's a very politically powerful company in the state of Florida. They were listed as a major sponsor of Governor Ron DeSantis' second inauguration, and usually that designation is reserved for political allies or top donors. I mentioned earlier as well that they funded a fundraiser for the bill's sponsor last year, the approval that would allow the state government to test this material. And you can find their influence just by driving through the state of Florida on any day between Tampa and Orlando. You might pass one of their mines or their processing facilities. They also have 13,000 employees in 6 different countries across the world, and they are one of the world's leading producers of phosphate. So very powerful company here in the state of Florida, and this decision is something that I'm watching very closely, both from the environmental standpoint, but also the economic standpoint as well.
Max Chesnes is a climate and environment reporter for the Tampa Bay Times. Coming up, a local group helps fathers under 24 build stronger relationships and communities. Hear from the man behind Young Fathers of Central Florida about reaching those who feel ignored, isolated, or alone. If you missed any part of our show today, you can always subscribe to the Engage podcast and listen when it's convenient for you. The program will be available on demand at cfpublic.org. You are listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Just a reminder, Father's Day is Sunday. In general, it's a time that honors father figures and paternal bonds. But if we break it down, there's a drastic difference between physically fathering a child and making that lifelong commitment to being a dad. Hakeem Nkrumah founded Young Fathers of Central Florida. He hosted a roundtable on responsible fatherhood yesterday in Orlando at the Grand Avenue Neighborhood Center to kick off the 17th annual Father's Week. For Nkrumah, a strong father, that is the bedrock of society, and he is dedicated to building that foundation. Nkrumah joined Engage earlier today to talk about the diverse communities he serves and why he started Young Fathers of Central Florida.
You know, it was the need. I just saw a need, and I think I started reading a lot of statistics on infant mortality and poverty in children, and I just wanted to find out why so many young children were dying, and before during that critical infant mortality age, newborn at 18 months, and then I started to see how many deaths was contributed to neglect and poverty, and the parents of those children were younger parents, not older parents. So many children in our country was dying from infant mortality, and the parents were at a young age, not 40, 50-year-old parents. So I kind of started making that connection between that and the lack of support young parents were getting, in particular young fathers. So it just all kind of developed out of that, realizing that so many of these young men didn't have fathers in their lives. And these fathers, when they leave these children in poverty, the mother and father in poverty. So right off the bat, the day they leave. So I just thought that if all these deaths are being attributed to these young men and the poverty is attributed to these young men, why isn't anyone working with these young fathers? When you look at teen pregnancy programs across the country, 90% of the participants are women, young girls, but there's no fathers in there at all. So I just thought that I just couldn't live with that.
Is there a prevention angle that you work on in terms of stopping young fathers from becoming a father?
That's a part of every one of our programs. It's prevention is responsible. It is responsibility and being responsible. That's what prevention is. And oftentimes I go into communities and I speak to large groups. I speak to women as well. I spoke to a group of women, about 100 young mothers, and we talked candidly. I told them, they asked me why does this guy leave and so forth and so on. And then I just, asked them about their relationship. I said, did you meet him on Friday and have sex with him on Saturday without a condom or protection and then get pregnant? I said, he doesn't know you, so he's not trying to stay with you. And then I tell the guys, I said, you came out of your bag and came up with every little slick rhyme or little thing to get her. And when you get her, you jump in bed with her the first night you can. And then you're not responsible enough to stay when the child is born. So it's a responsibility. So, and we also have a prevention program. We have a program called Gents to Gentlemen, which is for 10 to 13-year-old boys. So we try to get them before they even start having sex, because, we know that they started having sex now, 10 years old, because we have fathers 12 years old, 13, 14. We have them, all the way
Here in Central Florida?
Before. Excuse me?
Here in Central Florida you're talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, we've had 12, 13-year-old fathers since 2006.
Wow.
Yes, there's quite a few of them. There's quite, especially 14. It's so crazy. Like, I used to speak at high schools all the time, at least once or twice a week. And I would ask a group of 20, 25 young men, after the conversation to stay back if you're a father so we can talk a little more. Years ago, 2 or 3 guys will stay back. Now, 10 of those guys will stay back to their fathers. So I don't go to high schools to speak that much anymore because it's just the resources are just not there because there's so many of them. So yeah, we do is, but all of our programs we talk about, we do the typical, condoms and other birth control methods and abstinence, and we do all that. We incorporate all of that into all of our 10 programs.
You just did the roundtable on responsible fatherhood kickoff at the Grand Avenue Neighborhood Center in downtown Orlando, and that serves the Paramore and Holden Heights communities. Talk to me about how that event went last night, and why did you choose that area?
Well, when we started this years ago, Father's Week, we used to go to different community centers, and like maybe Monday we'll be at Callahan, Tuesday we'll be at J.R. Smith Center. So we used to rotate, but this year we decided to do it in one location, and we go to the areas where there's a need and the people ask for us. For example, Joe Caesar, who's the director over there at Grand Neighborhood Center, ask if they can be a part of it. They have a very beautiful facility there. It has a lot of components to it. So we said yes, we'll do it there. So we try to rotate the services throughout the city. So this year we just selected them. They asked for it. They had the facility for it, and that's why we selected that facility this year. That night, we have professionals who are interested in young fatherhood programs, who work with young men or they work with young women who have children. It's a roundtable discussion to talk about best practices and what resources are available to start agencies and what capacity building workshops and seminars there are available. So that night there, we're just there to meet and greet one another to see what resources that's in the community that can support one another. That's was the purpose of that night there, Responsible Fatherhood.
We're talking to Haki Nkrumah. He is the founder of Young Fathers of Central Florida. That was just one of the events happening this week. Tell me more about the Father's Week events happening all week.
Oh, okay. Last night, Monday, was Responsible Fatherhood. Tonight is a child support forum where we discuss child support issues that anyone in the community has. It can be a mom or a grandparent. We've been doing a lot of work with grandparents over the last 4 or 5 years, mainly because a lot of grandparents are raising their children. Instead of them being retired and enjoying their retired life, they're raising their children, their godchildren, which I'm pretty sure a lot of them have a lot of joy in, but still some grandparents are just not physically able to do it. So we try to do as much training as possible. So child support night, any individual can come where you have children, you're a caregiver, but any questions that they might have, we have child support professionals, we have family law attorneys, all coming to answer any questions that they could, just so that those individuals who need that help can get that help and support. Wednesday, we have non-custodial parent employment program. That's a program we established with helping non-custodial parents, whether they're mother or father, if they need a job and they on child support payments, and if they happen to be behind in child support because of lack of employment, this is where we come in to help them gain that employment. We partnered with Child Support and Career Source in the state of Florida to provide these services. Thursday is mentoring, a call to action. That night, we're looking for those individuals in the community who want to become mentors, whether they're a man or woman, because we need male mentors for our fathers and female mentors for our females. Because all the time people think, oh, women, they have all the services, but a lot of times they don't have much. We just think they have. That's why we have so many fathers, the mothers of their children. coming to us for help because they don't have a lot of support. So the call to action is for mentors for families who have children, or we also recruit professional mentors to mentor some of our older men who need mentors. For example, if young man wants to become a lawyer, so we try to match him up with attorneys who might want to mentor. And also, we discuss our dad-to-dad mentoring program where we have an older father mentor a younger father for a 1-year commitment because we know a lot of young men, I don't care what community you come from, white, black, Asian, whatever, a lot of them don't have their fathers around, whether it's because the absent father or father absent because he's working all the time. But a lot of young men have no father in their lives or father figure to help them see what men go through on a day-to-day basis, the good, bad, and the ugly. So that's what that mentoring day is about. And then Friday, we have our community resources. That's where we invite community agencies in who provide services to men and women, families in the community, but just so we can get them all in one room so people can ask all the questions that they need and to be able to get the resources. And then Saturday, we have our our fathers and family dinner where we invite fathers from the community and bring their children and their moms if they're with them, or the caregiver if they're with them, and they can come and enjoy a meal. And that's the week.
So, what have you heard from fathers that you've worked with about the impact of young fathers of Central Florida? Is there a story that maybe resonates with you that you can share with us?
There's been so many stories. I wouldn't know where to start because we've been doing this a while. It's funny. One story that always kind of tickles me is where I was at a community center and this young little boy was looking at me. He kept looking at me, staring at me, like really not in a good way. I mean, he was looking at me like he wanted to, choke my neck or something. And so I finally talked to him and he said he didn't like me. I said, why? He said, because you made my daddy cry. I said, I made your daddy cry. He said, yeah. And his father rushes over to him. He said, no, 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 son. He said, Mr. Nkrumah, when I was crying, it was because I was happy because he got me my first job. And so it was crying out of joy. And he said, and the boy just didn't understand it. He just still looked at me like I was an evil guy because I made his daddy cry. So he said, no, Mr. Nkrumah is a good man. It was a good cry. I was able to, buy you things and feel like a man. And he really talked to his son, and his son finally got it and looked at me and kind of like hugged me a little bit. So that always touches me, and when I think about that. But I have a lot of fathers who never was responsible in their lives, like for anything other than themselves. And I wrote a small book with Dr. Claudette McFadden at Bethune-Cookman University, and we asked 100 fathers a question. I wish someone would have told me. And so all these guys answered this question, but the answers that they gave were so different. Some guys said, I wish they would have told me that I was going to love a person more than I love myself, with their child. I wish someone would have told me that I'm going to do things that I never thought I would do to make money for my children. So it's like there's a lot of things that guys never saw themselves doing because of their children. That's why my second book was titled Teen Fathers, The Struggles and Joys of Fatherhood. I wanted fathers to see that there's struggles being a parent, but then there's joys of being a parent, which is parenting, which is the hardest job they'll ever have. But there's struggles and joys. I didn't want young men to feel that just because they had a child, that was the worst thing in the world to happen for them, that they were somehow bad people because of it. And just like I said, what nationality, what economic background you have, it's all the same. It's all the same. So whether it's a job, whether it's employment, whether it's parent training. I never forget the time I was speaking to a group of about 50 men, and we was talking about childproof in your home, safety in the home. And I asked them, did they feel their house was safe? And, you had all these guys, yes. And I said, how? All of them like raised their hand. We got guns, we got shotguns, all these weapons to protect our family. And then I said, okay, and how many of you have fire extinguishers in your home? It's like 10 guys raised their hand out of 50. I said, well, more people die from house fires than they do from home invasions. But here you are, you got all these weapons and you never use them. But here you are, you don't even know what to do. You never had a fire drill in your own home. The only fire drill some of you probably experience is at school. So it's like no matter what it is, I wanted guys to understand that it's important for you to look at what parenting is all about. If people in the community tell you, you make an impact when they come to you and they want another program. Can you start a program doing this, that, and the other? So, that's when you make an impact.
Haki Nkrumah is the CEO of Young Fathers of Central Florida. I'd like for you to join us in person this Saturday for our first on-location show taping. Engage in your community, Eatonville. We want to share the untold stories of the town. Please join us this Saturday at the Eatonville Branch Library starting at 2:30 in the afternoon. That is all for us today here on Engage. We will be back Thursday at 3 o'clock. All of our shows are available on demand at cfpublic.org. I'm Sharon Stone. Thanks for joining us. All Things Considered is coming up following NPR News.